Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome back to Cutting the Distance. Today's guest comes to us with a bunch of data, research, and information on elk, their biology, and their behavior. I want to see how we may be able to take this information and use it to our benefit during hunting season, see what makes sense, what relates, what doesn't, and what you're seeing out there. So Brock McMillan comes to us with a PhD in biology. He was a professor of ecology at Minnesota State University for 9 years prior to joining the faculty as wildlife ecologist at BYU for the past 15 years. In addition to all of his professional experience, he is also an archery elk hunter, which I'm most excited about because we get to jump in and talk about some of the things that I've observed and if they have a biological reasoning, as well as what he's observed and maybe how they relate, how they're different. I also hope to dive into some of the research and see if it sheds a little light on why and how come those questions that I ask myself every September, and I find myself trying to answer those every fall. So welcome to the show, Brock.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Appreciate having you here. I know you guys are just like everywhere across the West. You're in the thick of calving season. How's that going for you there in Utah?
It's going great. We're right dead center. So yesterday we collared our middle calf, meaning that half of our elk that we have collared have given birth and half are still waiting to give birth. And so yesterday was the dead center day.
Gotcha. And that relates to timing, which we're definitely going to jump into here in a little bit, timing of the rut and how that affects, drop dates and whatnot. I know, being from Washington, we're up a little bit further north. I know they're just I think they're maybe a little bit on the front end. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and how latitude may affect that, may not affect it in your opinion. I'm actually going to go over to Eastern Washington and help capture calves here next week and then interview their biologists. So it's that time of year. Really thankful to have you here.
You bet.
So like every podcast, we're going to start with some listener questions. And for this episode, I went to Is It September Yet? It's a Facebook group, bunch of diehard archery elk hunters. They live for that month of September. So I'm excited to bring some of their questions to you here, Brock. And the first one that we got from Dan Scalis from the Is It September Yet group. In your opinion, how does the moon phase affect the rut and the elk behavior? There's a lot of built up. I'm gonna elaborate on that. There's a lot of talk about taking your vacation around moon phases or taking it just on the backside of a full moon. In your opinion, or not even your opinion, what does the science or research say about full moon and how it affects the rut?
Jason, I would love to be able to answer that question. I don't know, and that's a bad answer. But we have activity data that right now we've actually GPS collared about 1,700 elk. And so we know movement behavior for all of those animals. And we're just analyzing right now the effect of time of day, season, moon phase. So I don't have a complete answer for that, but undoubtedly it has some effect.
Yeah. I'm going to roll a little bit of my information, a little background on myself, Brock. Being an engineer, I'm very data driven. That's why I like talking to biologists, because it's like the data is what the data is. You can read it and interpolate it however you want. But One year we set out a trail camera on a 1 month cycle. We set out on October 1st and we picked it up on September 1st. We then went through and categorized every picture we got of bulls, time of day, and what it related to the moon phase. And all we saw was a slight shift in timing. When the moon was out, we would see those animals coming out a little bit later if the moon wasn't. And it didn't really seem to have an effect as much as you would think. It was just a slight movement in time. Now that's, unscientific. It's just me looking at one trail camera in one location, but we did see, the moon, whether it relates to the brightness or their visibility, we did see things, leave earlier and come out later, I guess. At water, and this was at a water source. So I guess we need to preface that, as well as I also went back and looked at, 15 or 20 of my bull kills that I could remember days and times and whatnot. And one thing that was actually, contrary to what you hear, a lot of what's said is, following a full moon is the best time to hunt, off of a full moon going into no moon, is your best time to hunt. I had actually killed the majority, I think 14 out of 20 of those bulls were leading up to a full moon within that week of the full moon. And so not that it's good data, at least in my, circumstances, it didn't seem to matter that much.
Right, Jason. So, the literature is the evidence that is in the literature suggests that photoperiod is what drives the hormone cycles on both male and female elk. And so there can be an effective moon phase, and we hope to be able to determine if there is an effective moon phase, but the primary driver is photoperiod. So as days are shortening, testosterone levels are increasing in the bulls, and the follicle stimulating hormone in the females is leading them into estrus.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to jump into that pretty heavy here in a little bit. So we'll talk about photoperiod, but yeah, this is really, it's not non-scientific, but I get asked a lot of times, if you only could take 1 week of vacation, when would you hunt? And it's really what you're looking at the hunt, whether you want kind of that pre-rut action, whether you want to be in the middle of the bugling, whether you want to be on the post. But there's only so many days in September. So in my position where I can hunt a lot, I'm just hunting regardless of the moon phase. But I don't, and this is all opinion based, I don't think it matters as much as we like to think. But it's real, it's just based on my experience.
When they're rutting, Jason. So I think that you're probably right there.
Yeah. Okay. Our second question comes in from Thor Mundy, also from Is It September Yet? During a call-in, you have a bull all riled up, and the next thing, that bull rounds up his cows and leaves. Is there biology involved there? We're going to get deep into calling elk here in a little bit, but I wanted to throw this question up front. And I guess there may not be enough information. Winding, did you get too close, or did that bull feel threatened? But can you explain that scenario out in the field and what you think may be going through that bull's head that was involved in the call in and willing to communicate with you, and then all of a sudden stops the communication?
I don't have a biological explanation for that. I've had that exact same experience several times, and maybe, Jason, you're a better caller than I am, but my guess is you've had that situation as well. I think every bull has a different personality, and actually there's been some personality work done lately, and that's true. They have different personalities. Some are much more likely to take risks than others. So I think that I don't know if you can get too close. If they don't smell you, my experience, and I don't know, Jason, you'd be different. I go in hard until I get pretty close, and then I try to be quiet because elk are noisy. You know that in the woods. There's no reason to be timid getting close. Yeah. No, I'm in that same boat. I feel, number one, they don't smell you. Number two, you obviously don't want to let them see you. It's secondary, but it's not as important as being scented. But I'm the same way. As long as you're not going to get picked off, getting as close as possible has always been my game plan. If vegetation and terrain allow it, I'm gonna get real tight, because we all know, and maybe to elaborate on that question, why he rounds his bull, or why that bull rounds his cows up and leaves. It's that threat of losing his cows. These
these bulls are out there with the sole purpose to live and then recreate, and they've got their for sure thing. If a bull starts to put pressure on them, or you do get too close, and his personality is such that he'd rather retain his cows and not risk fighting a new bull that showed up for him, of course he's going to go the other way. And we talked about it on this podcast before, and I've talked about it in some of my calling strategy. This is why I sometimes start with different levels of threat. Like, would a cow call have necessarily forced him to leave right away? Or, and don't get me wrong, I'm a heavy bugler, but it's sometimes tough to figure out why that bull just rounds up and leaves at a certain point during the call-in that we may not know. And
it might change during the rut, because, bulls may lose 30% of their body mass. They may be losing 300 pounds during the rut when they're not eating and they're fighting all the time. So early in the rut, the dominant bull's there and he's saying, I'm willing to fight anybody. But 10 days later, he may say, I'm out of energy and I'm going to avoid any conflict that I can.
Yep. Yeah. It's a lot less energy expended to round his cows up and leave versus dealing with another mature bull. Okay, this one, and I apologize ahead of time, Brock. These were the 4 questions I pulled as user questions, so I didn't let you, kind of review them. And I don't know if you'll have an answer or not, but so in the West, in elk country, we deal with a lot of fire conditions, especially into September and especially as of late. Is there any indication that smoky air, poor air quality affects rutting bulls at all, or is it strictly based on photo period?
I don't think anybody studied that, but I can imagine there's an effect.
Okay, yeah, I'm in that same boat. Aside from the effect it has on me trying to breathe and get around a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And that was from Marshall Byron there on Is It September Yet? And then you may have some insight to this one. This is a little more technical question. Comes from Michael Cummings from Is It September Yet? What does the science say about shooting bulls versus cows for the health of the herd? And I'm going to elaborate on this question a little bit. Is sometimes you see areas where herds are really, I would say, performing poorly in an area, or they're not meeting objectives, and then you get frustrated with the Fish and Wildlife Commission or the whoever it may be that we're giving 2 bull tags out, but yet we still have 50 cow tags in the unit. I'm gonna ask that from a hunter's perspective. What does in your opinion taking cows versus bulls, and how does that negatively or adversely affect it, or does it in your opinion?
So I hope this is something we get into, because I think this is a really complex question. If you're a rancher, a cattle rancher, you don't want any bulls in your herd, because every bull you put in the herd is a lack of food for another cow to produce a calf. And I think it's generally the same for elk. You don't need very many bulls in the herd to service all the cows and to service them during their estrus. I hear all the time, well, if you don't have enough, they go into a second estrus. We have no evidence of that whatsoever. Zero. And so the more bulls that you remove from the herd, the more productive the herd's going to be. Now, there's less bulls to see when you're hunting if you do that, but the herd as a whole will be more productive. The other kicker is, Jason, and this is a big one for us in Utah, is as a population ages, say, for example, you are not removing cows and the average age of the cow increases, the likelihood that that cow becomes pregnant goes down with age. And so as a herd ages as a whole, the productivity of that herd goes down regardless of how many are on the landscape. So there's a whole bunch of factors. If we have too many mouths on the landscape, production is going to go down, because nutrition drives whether a cow goes into estrus or not. If she's not fat enough, she doesn't even go into estrus. And so pregnancy rates will be low. Same thing. If the herd's getting old, pregnancy rate will be low, and the herd just won't be as productive as it was during the growth phase for that herd. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to jump into herd dynamics and a little bit bull to cow ratio and some of that. And I've got a lot more questions. We can expand on this. Like we'll what's a good management tool to make sure you're only taking those older cows, or how do you determine that? So I've got some questions from a hunter's perspective, like, and a game manager's perspective, like how do you even manage that
Right.
for the optimal herd health? But we'll jump into that. So no, I appreciate you answering that question. And I'll kind of wrap up our listener questions today, Brock. And once again, if you have questions of your own you'd like me or my guests, the experts, to try to answer, feel free to email us at ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com, or reach out to us on social, and give us your questions, and we'll try to include them here. So can't thank the guys over at the Is It September Yet page enough for filling us up with some questions. And the ones I didn't get to, we're for sure going to get to in my conversation. So next up, we're going to jump into my discussion here, Brock.
Excellent.
So like I mentioned earlier, I'm excited when I get to talk to biologists, researchers, scientists, people that have hard data to look at. I would say I go out there as a guy that just learned by trial and error. This works, this doesn't work. Maybe I have an opinion why it doesn't, but there's no data, right? Besides it happening multiple times or not. And so very excited to talk to you today, Brock, and kind of run some scenarios, questions, issues, whatever it may be by you, to see if, what the science supports. I know we had a great conversation a week ago, and I got excited about some of the things you had talked about like cows coming into estrus, why adjacent units are doing good and bad. So really excited to jump in here. So I'm gonna break this all the way down to the foundation, and I don't feel that any of this is below elk hunters, but let's start with the elk rut in general. I want to build this whole conversation off that foundation. Can you just go into the generalities of the elk rut as far as timing? Bulls going to cows, cows going to bulls. Like, as far as the bulls run the herd for that amount of time, or do the lead cows run the herd? Like, just give us a 5-minute snapshot of the elk rut and what's taking place.
So I think the elk rut is dictated by partition, dictated by birth. So what's driving when the rut is that calf has maximum nutrition when it has maximum need. And so the maximum energetic requirement is just prior to weaning that calf. So the female gives birth, like right now, the 1st of June, and for the next 3 or 4 or sometimes 6 or 7 months, she's nursing that young, although she starts to wean in 2 to 3 months. So she needs maximum food on the ground in 2 to 3 months from right now to help that calf grow as much as possible. And so that dictates when the calf is born. And that's the evolutionary force is going to drive that date. And then gestation is 240 to 250 days. And so the rut has to happen 240 to 250 days before that date for everything to be optimal. And so I think that's what's driving when the rut happens. So if today, which it is, the peak of partition on the unit we're studying right now, we're the peak partition, then like the 24th of September should have been the peak of rut this last year.
Do you feel that those 240 days, is that variable amongst units, or is it kind of pre-programmed, like you said, into that evolutionary data, or is it 250 days for a certain unit and 230 days for a different unit?
That's a great question. All we know about the gestation is from captive elk. And what we know in captive elk is gestation can vary from about 240 to 262 days. I don't think there's near that much variation. Those are the extremes. I think that in general, it varies from 245 to 250 days. And like humans, it's not everybody is exactly 9 months. Some come a couple days shorter, some go a couple days longer. In my case, a week longer, and I was 11 pounds. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So I don't want to misinterpret your numbers, but you're saying that it's a fairly tight range, because if you're saying only 22 days is the extreme ranges of that envelope, does that mean all of these elk or all of these cows are being bred within a very, very short time window, or I mean, because we've all been out there, right? And so we've heard bulls beagling, end of August all the way to the beginning of October. Larger herds seem to take longer. Are those all? Is that rut activity happening outside of the breeding, or is it? Are those like anomalies or outliers why that bull stays, kind of active and those cows are entering estrus those kind of off times outside of that 22-day window you kind of just mentioned?
So the 22-day window is the gestation. So that doesn't dictate.
Gotcha. Yep.
That doesn't dictate how long the rut is, because we don't have hard data yet. But what we think is happening is a cow has to reach a certain condition level before she can go into estrus. And so healthy fat cows come into estrus earlier than poor condition cows, if the poor condition cow comes into estrus at all. And so we had our first birth, Jason, 9 days ago now, and we're already in the middle. But my guess is that parturition or birthing will tell all the way towards the end of June. And so, absolutely, the rut may start 9 days before September 24th, start going really good. So we're sitting at about September 15th for these units here.
Yep.
And the majority of all the animals are going to be bred by October 5th. But there are some that were poor condition that are still trying to get to sufficient condition to go into estrus. And so it may lag, the rut may lag all the way into the middle or even to the end of October for those few straggler cows that are still trying to get enough fat on their bones.
So I'm just trying to reduce this data to areas I've hunted. So if you're in, let's say, a unit that doesn't have necessarily the best wintering ground, and so those cows go back into spring and summer in poor condition, is that where you may see that rut going longer just because it's taking them a little bit more, or their health isn't as good, and so you may see that rut go longer in those more mountainous units, versus if you're in a low-lying unit that has easy winters, you may see them all come in, like you said, middle of September and hit all at the same time, where you get a high percentage of your cows all at once versus different levels or a spread out array of health?
So that's a great question. And I don't know 100% the answer. If I draw on deer data, so that they're a little different than elk, summer habitat is way more important than winter habitat. And I think it's true for elk too, unless they're feeding on somebody's alfalfa field or haystack. And so what they come out of winter in condition is dictated by the condition they go into winter. And so what they have to eat in the summer dictates more about estrus than how mild the winters are where they're living.
Gotcha. So they can overcome that hard winter through their feed and health through late spring, summer, and then that will get them back to kicking their estrus off at the right time.
Right, because their condition is September is dictating what is happening, and so they have the ability to overcome anything that happened in winter. Every elk on the landscape in an area that has real winters basically has burnt through all of their energy reserves by the end of winter, and they're running on fumes. Especially true for deer, but elk too. They're running on fumes by April.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, and I'm sure there's little side pieces we could pick at there for a long time. So during that rut, in your opinion, at least in my area up in the mountains, the bulls like to hang out together through July, most of August, and then towards the end of August, middle of August, we can start to see these bulls split up, and the cows have hung out by themselves with maybe some immature bulls. Is there info or data that supports the bulls going to the cows or the cows going to the bulls? Let's say you're running trail cameras and you've got all these pictures of bulls and they disappear. Should I go to the nearest location of cows, or what's going on there during the rut?
So we have about 7 years of data on this question. We haven't looked at it specifically the way you're asking here, but it appears that when bulls lose the velvet, they start heading for traditional rutting grounds, and the cows do too.
Yep.
And so they have areas that they meet, and it may be very different than where they've spent the whole summer, either of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I would say just in my observation, the cows seem to be closer to that rutting area because it always seems like my bulls will up and leave, go a mile in a direction. But I know that there was a majority of cows over there. And that's one of the reasons I always like when I'm scouting, not necessarily look for elk, not necessarily look for sign at the time, but like where are the rubs? The rubs were like a great indicator of where they're rutting and where they're going to spend that September. But yeah, if they both move, I could see that. But I've always just assumed that the bulls are going to leave their location to go find the cows. But you're saying that there is some research or indication that those cows also may leave their area and go to like a neutral spot or a meetup spot.
So the cow-calf nursing grounds are often very similar to the rutting grounds. And so you're already going to find cows there often, but cows will move to those grounds as well.
Gotcha. That lines up real well with what I've seen. And a lot of people get frustrated with only having cows on their cameras, and I'm like, well, unless you're looking for specific bulls, like just hang out there, because I think those bulls will eventually show in that area. They may just be hanging out in a secluded tight basin or whatnot, or non-visible.
They may be 3, 4, 10 miles away.
Yep.
We have some that move. I think we have one bull that I looked at in particular that went 17 miles from like the 20th of August to the 10th of September.
Yeah, that's amazing. It does you no good to scout there, and that's why we always recommend scouting as absolutely close to your season as possible, because things are going to change. In addition to pressure on the landscape, elk are just going to move regardless.
Absolutely. In Utah, our archery season is like August 15th to September 17th, and the bulls that are there, as well as me, you scout them all summer and you go, I'm going to start opening day this canyon. And that's about the time they start losing velvet. And they may be there 1 or 2 days, and then every one of them disappears from that canyon you've scouted all summer. Yep.
We've got some good intel from guys that pay a lot of attention, like in Nevada. They've got such an early season where he saw 50 plus mature bulls within a tight little pocket. And they're there so early that he said, as you see the rut like wind up, by the time it was over, there were like 2 of those 50 bulls were left there, or even in adjacent canyons. That was their spot to sit in the velvet and eat the best green grass or whatever they had going. And then instantly, the rut starts and they all filtered out of there besides a couple bulls. And so, we got some good data that those things just literally disappear.
There's really good biological reasons for that, and it's been studied quite a bit. So cows and bulls have very different selective pressures. Cows are generally selecting habitat where they can feed their offspring, but also where their offspring are protected from predators. And bulls don't really worry about predators near as much. So they always go to the absolute best habitat that they can find to put on mass. And so because of those 2 different selective pressures, they're often separated in the summer.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam Motor Treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that Seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. It's really simple. When you pour it in your gas tank, Seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it clean your fuel system. You probably know someone who has used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again. People everywhere rely on Seafoam to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way that they should the entire season. Help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
I'm going to ask one more question here on just stuff that I want to know about the elk rut and what I've perceived. And the question is just, which elk runs the herd? Is it the bull, the herd bull, or is it that lead cow, or is it dual duty? Because in my opinion, I've seen like dual duty, but I'm going to listen to your answer and then maybe throw in some of my experience there.
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I do know that when they're not together, it's that lead cow, of course. In fact, we have cows. Their social structure is pretty fluid, meaning that the groups that are living together, you may have these 15 together today, and 4 of them pick up and move over and join this group. And that's what I mean by fluid. They change who they're with regularly. And we have elk that migrate in the winter, and where they migrate to is dictated by the lead cow. So we have cows we've been monitoring for 5 years, and they go to a different place every single winter, and it's based on who they're with. And so the adult female is the matriarch, whoever the dominant female in the group is the one that drives a lot of it. I'm not sure about males. I think it's got to be a combination because of that matriarchal lineage is so strong.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen is it seems like as long as everything is going the way the bull wants it to, and he's not being pestered by satellite cows, or he's not being pressured by people, hunters, predators, the lead cow kind of leads the herd back into their bedding area. She kind of leads them out to feed. She's the one that, gets up when it's time to leave bed and come back out to feed. And all of those, what I would call just, the daily decisions that herd is making and what they're going through with. Now, where I see the bull, there have been times where, he rounds his cows up and pushes them. He gets forceful. He uses, horns, he uses his stature, whatever he needs to. And he will at times force that herd to go where he wants them to, whether it's to escape danger, get them away from other bulls, whatever it may be. I've also seen like the bull push the cows off so that he can come back and, either check out a bull or confront a bull that's pestering him. So I feel like it's a dual relationship, but I think if we weren't to interject and if we weren't to spook the bull or predators weren't, the lead cow is going to do the majority of the leading in that herd, even during the rut, until that bull feels pestered enough or there's a reason enough he wants to move those cows, he physically does.
So I think that's generally true. That's supported by, nobody's really looked at who's driving it that I know of anyway. Nobody's really looked at who's driving their movement or their behavior during the rut. But during the rest of the year, it's the lead cow. And I find it hard to think that that's how it goes for 47 months of the year. And then 5 months of the year, a bull comes in and takes over. Ultimately, the cow chooses to be with the bull or to let the bull there.
Yep.
She's the final choice whether she's going to mate with that bull or not. He may be the dominant bull and not let any other bulls, but she only has to take one step if she doesn't want to mate with him.
Yep. No, that just some general questions about the elk rut, kind of what I've thought. And so now we're going to run into rut timing, which is I botched the gestational period there in the last time. Now we're really talking about rut timing and when things start to get going. And a lot of it may be perceived. There may be people thinking the rut's cranking at the end of August when we all know that's not happening, but they're hearing bugles. So it is perceived that the rut's going at that time. So in my opinion, it's based on photo period, but I'm going to let you kind of jump in and you kind of already answered this, I guess, above when we're talking about, getting that calf on the ground at the optimal time. And then going backwards based on gestation from that. But in your opinion, is that kicked off by photo period, which I think is a general consensus, which lets them know that they're 250 days, ahead, like that's their clock, or what other factors affect kicking off the rut?
So how it works, Jason, is the evolutionary selective pressure. If the female gives birth at the right time of year, she's more likely to have an offspring survive. And if a female gives birth at the wrong time of year, she's less likely. And so if the successful female continues to be successful, pretty soon that timing becomes the main timing because she's had all the calves and the ones that other times haven't. That's what drives that parturition timing, and that's what drives the timing of the rut. So it is, but they don't say, oh, I need to give birth on June 1st, so I'm going to count back 250 days. Of course, they don't do that.
Yep.
So they've tied it to what's called a Zeitgeber. That's Zeitgeber, which is a German word that means timekeeper. And all animals, you and I have an internal clock. You're younger than me, but I wake up every morning at like 5 minutes after 6. And that's an internal clock in me. And that internal clock in mammals is regulated in general. The primary thing it's regulated by is photoperiod. The Zeitgeber, or the timekeeper, or the clock setter, is photoperiod. It can be resources, it can be a few other things, but the primary thing in mammals is photoperiod. And so that is what the brain is using to tell a bull elk when his testosterone levels should increase. And when his testosterone levels increase, that's when his antlers harden and he sheds the velvet. And that's when he starts into his testes enlarge and he starts searching for potential mates. And so, yeah, it absolutely can happen at the end of August that he starts searching for potential mates when there's none available.
Gotcha. And then to wind it back a little bit, we talked about cows and their health affecting that. Are the cows, they know based on, I'm not going to even try to re-say the word you did that sound like lightsaber, but
let's go with lightsaber.
There you go. They're the elk's lightsaber. So if you were to look at that, they know they need to based on that, which is a lot to do with photoperiod, and the light that they're getting. They know they need to try to be, 240 to 250 days ahead, but then their health also affects that. So,
right. So
it's a little bit of a balance. Like they know they need to come in now, but it may take 5, 10, 15, 20 days based on them getting their health to a certain point. So they're just constantly trying to, their body's telling them to, but they just can't. Is that how that works?
So yes and no. So they don't ever make a conscious decision. Evolution has dictated that when days are this long, that's the optimal time to go into estrus. And so, or actually when nights are this long, uninterrupted darkness is what really regulates it. So when nights are this long, that's what the optimal time to go into estrus. But if a female carried a calf the whole summer, or she nursed a calf the whole summer, she's still trying to recover. And so she may be delayed if she was successful in raising a calf. Same thing, if you're living in a marginal habitat and you had a really severe winter and you had a calf, you're going to be delayed a little bit. If you're older, you're always in poor condition, you may be delayed a little bit. So evolution has dictated the optimal, but there's a lot of other forces pushing them off the optimal.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense there. In your opinion, and I know we see it a lot more drastic in the deer population, but is the rut timing based, we've already talked about it being based on photoperiod, which does that coordinate directly with latitude, or does latitude itself have anything to do with that aside from the days being shorter or longer than, a different latitude?
Sure. We don't have a strong analysis on the effect of latitude for elk, although we've just developed a mathematical model where we can look at timing of parturition based on movement patterns. And so we can look at that. But definitely in deer, there is a strong latitudinal effect. So you would expect it to be similar in elk as well. And that is, as you go north, the rut becomes earlier, which is a little counterintuitive maybe for some people.
And I mean, it's very noticeable in deer. I was down in Mexico Coues deer hunting this year in the end of January, and the Coues deer were going crazy down there still, or like the Arizona over the counter archery tag, mule deer are rutting into December through the middle of January, and our rut's, 2 months gone. But it seems like I can go down to New Mexico and elk hunt, and the rut's the same, about the same spot as they are up here in Washington, maybe a few days either way. But I've always been curious if there's anything that supports that latitude difference like it does on the deer side.
So yeah, I don't know. Have me back next year and I should be able to answer that question more completely. Even in Utah, from northern part of the state to the southern part of the state, there's a full 2 weeks difference in deer.
Yep.
With the northern part of the state, peak parturition is about June 5th for deer. And in the southern part of the state, it's like June 23rd, June 22nd. So you backdate from that. And so that's a huge difference latitudinal. I would expect there's some of that in elk, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. To wrap up rut timing, are there any other factors that are, that correlate high enough that's worth talking about, or is it really just based on that photo period and the length of the nights? No,
I think the one factor that we haven't touched on maybe enough, we have a pretty popular unit in Utah. It's called the Book Cliffs. It's a limited entry deer unit, and it's a limited entry elk unit. And it's what I would call summer range limited habitat, and in effect, it's marginal habitat. There's just not a lot of summer range for elk. And in dry years, elk are in relatively poor condition, and only in the best of best years are they in good condition. But the cool thing, if the herd in general is in poor condition, the rut will be much more spread out. And if the herd is in really good condition, the rut will be much more punctuated. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the elk don't have to spread out to find resources and find food, and spread out the cows. They're all able to kind of be in that prime area
I think it's because they're all in good enough condition to come into estrus at the optimal date. Whereas in poor condition, they're just straggling in, getting to that critical condition they need to go into estrus. And so let me give you an example. 1 year we had 40 bursts that we were monitoring, and all 40 of those bursts occurred, I believe, between May 25th and like June 29th. And the next year, bursts started on May 15th, and they went all the way into the middle of July. They were spread out over 2 full months, and they were in really bad condition the previous rut season. And so I just think that it can be spread out a lot more in herds that are old or in herds that are living in marginal habitat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not that I would necessarily apply for units around that idea, but it's great to note that it does exist. And if you had an October season that went into some of these marginal units, you may still hit the rut. I wouldn't say in the peak, but more in the height. Versus if you were in a unit that has great summer habitat, the rut is over earlier. And now that we're talking about this, really nobody ever believes me when I talk about Southwest Washington. We set our muzzleloader season on the first Saturday of October. Our rut you can literally slam the door on our rut for the most part by the end of September, 1st of October. And it's because we are in a rainforest, right? These elk don't migrate. They're local herds. They've got all the food in the world with clear cuts and all the greenage around here. But yet I firmly believe our rut is dang near over on October 1st versus you go up in the mountains, or if I go, I'm like, man, the rut goes so much longer out of state, and these other units are up in the mountains. And so that really correlates with what I've seen on the ground versus what I've seen in my backyard.
That's interesting. I deer hunt usually the third week of October, and the rut is regularly still going, at least stragglers in our mountains of Utah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I called a bull, my wife's first bull I called in on October 29th, called it in, but it was in the mountains, central mountain, the east slope of of the Cascade Mountains, and it's just different unit, different area, bigger herds, a migratory unit that has to live on feed grounds, in the winter, versus our elk here have always just been done. So that makes sense on maybe why that correlates.
So I can't remember if we're going to talk about it, but are we going to talk about pregnancy rates, which would drive how strong the rut is?
Yeah, we were going to talk a little bit. I know I have a note coming on perceived strength of the rut, and then cows coming into estrus, sometimes only 50% of them. So we'll get into that. Yeah, in just a little bit. But as a matter of fact, the only question I have in between those two, I wanted to ask about, one of the perceived things is we're out there hunting. We've had a couple good high pressure days in a row. Rut's really going good. It seems to be getting better and better. And then you get a rain squall come in, and it shuts the rut down, or that's what's perceived. The activity seems to be different, whether it's, hunters get lazier, they're not working as hard. In your opinion, when I say your opinion, is there data that supports or research that supports weather and how it affects the rut?
So not that I know of. Again, that's a question that we're asking right now. Absolutely, weather is going to affect activity patterns. I would say in my hunting experience, it's exactly the opposite. The worse the weather, the more it's going.
Really?
And so, if the weather, maybe because it's so warm here and the elk are just overheated during the rut, September, super hot still. If it's a hot day, by early morning, they're back in the dark timber on the north slopes and they're bedded down. But if it starts snowing, they're active all day long.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was told by an old timer that I used to hunt with or hung around and got some tips and tricks from. He believed that the rain washes away all the scent that's on the ground. I don't know if I believe that or not, but it was one of those things where it's like you kind of scratch your head. Is that true? If cows are, close or they're peeing, all over the landscape, does that get that bull fired up? And so he's bugling more as he travels around or not? I don't know. I just kind of put that in there as far as the weather affecting the rut and potentially supports what I've seen. But it sounds like you've seen the opposite. So it's not necessarily maybe a factor.
So definitely olfactory is the way that elk communicate and tell each other that I'm approaching estrus, or I'm in estrus, or I just ovulated. That's how they're communicating with each other. So anything that changes the amount of olfactory communication on the landscape is going to change behavior. Having said that, they have a pretty keen sense of smell, and I'm not, once the rut's going, I'm not sure that they're using scent marking as much as before the rut. I think that they've started to gather up their animals and they're checking their animals regularly. They have a phlegm behavior like bison where it's called a lip curl, where they can open up a whole bunch of receptors, olfactory receptors in their nose, and they can tell whether that female is approaching estrus or not, but they check them individually by then.
Yep. Yeah, where you see that bull get up and go nudge every cow out of her bed, check her, scent checker, and then move on to the next one. Yep. So that's part one of our podcast here with Brock McMillan on elk. Stay tuned for part two coming at you next time on Cutting the Distance. Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.